do you feel like the dialogue between the two mediums kind of encourages writers and video game developers to experiment with the way that they're telling stories?
I think so, and I think and hopefully you will continue to see like better feedback when games are really well written. They just it's like, or translation is better done. Like Final Fantasy 14, it has some really really great writing in it. Later on in the series, but it gets a lot better than it is in the kind of the beginning. And obviously, games like Mass Effect or Horizon Zero Dawn or The Last of Us have pretty incredible writing. So yeah, I think they'll surpass or equal books eventually. You're never going to get quite the visual cadence, but
yeah, that's true. Does anyone else have anything to add to that, and sort of the dialogue between the two storytelling methods and how they kind of encourage experimentation, or in the case of video games, like how they might eventually match up to written work?
Well, one of the reasons you haven't seen that great writing in video games, well, partly because it's not prioritized, and partly because it's very hard. It's very hard. Every medium uses language differently, and language is just not the main show in video games, and you have to figure out how to sort of loft it in and not intrude on the player's own idea of their consciousness, and not obviously write long cutscenes that you can't skip, and all that sort of things. Video games are so much about space and motion, and you have to write and convey your meaning without getting in the way of that. So I mean, yeah, like I said, video games exist side by side with novels. Neither one will displace the other.
Yeah. Anyone else?
It's kind of a. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay.
Jenny first, and then we'll come back to Ron.
Random practical thought, but there, I'm guessing, will always be more readers than video game players, so that's something to think about as far as like you can kind of reach a wider audience with your novel writing. Typically,
is that true even now?
I don't know. Video games sell quite a lot. In a lot of cases, yeah.
I'm thinking more in terms of like sci-fi fantasy, like. Maybe not, because that overlaps a lot, but other genres, like I know plenty of people who would read a certain book, but would, if it was a video game, wouldn't touch it. Like they don't want anything to do with video games. I think it's just part of like the circles I run in, like are all video game people. So it's, you sometimes have to remind yourself there are other people out there that, that don't.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think also from a really practical point of view, this might just be because I'm a college student. There are tons of people I know who could afford a book but couldn't afford a console or a computer good enough to run a game.
True.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a reasonably successful book that will sell 20 or 40 or 50,000 copies. That's an absolute failure for a video game. If you're under 1 million, you're thinking about whether to close up shop.
Yeah, that's true. And Ron, what were you going to say?
Okay, let's see if I can remember the first point in a minute. But I think it's interesting because, like you were talking about the environments that you're in terms of readers versus gamers. Because my wife's a teacher and I substitute at the school, so I'm around the kids a lot. And without fail, I would say the vast majority of them I would consider gamers and not readers at all. It's a complete flip of that. And maybe it's just being the teenagers, and we don't like reading. Reading's dumb. But but without fail, I can. It's guaranteed that I can go into a classroom and have a conversation with most of the class about some aspect of game. Yeah. But if I were to bring up books, whether classics that they have to read or current, books that I'm into or that I think they might like, there are readers there for sure, but it's less likely that I'll be able to have a conversation with them.
Yeah, that's true. I have a friend who's a teacher as well, and she's, just like the relatability of certain things, like video game, there's a lot more relatability because just maybe it's a generational thing. I'm not sure, because it's even like a generation below, like Ciel, for instance, where, who knows what their storytelling preferences necessarily are. And something like books, it's like, oh, that's fucking antiquated. Like, I don't want to do that. And if I am reading a book, it's on my Kindle or my iPad or on my phone, even, like crazy.
Oh, if I pull out an actual like physical book, they're just like, especially if it's, you know, like a
what,
tome
what
like
is that
this.
smell?
Yeah,
Ugh.
I cannot relate to that. I hate Kindle. I hate reading on
I'm
my
with
phone.
you 100%.
I only read physical books. The one exception is AO3, which is designed to be read on your phone between the hours of midnight and 2 a.m.
That's very specific.
That's the exception.
Don't get me wrong. I would rather live in the world where readers outnumber video game players, and I hope I still do.
But who knows what's going to happen in like the next 5-10 years, whatever. Yeah.
Well, and it's weird because talking about involving language in games, this is probably going to sound terrible, but like take Skyrim, as I'm playing through it, as I find a book, I don't read it. I can't stand playing it.
I can't do that either.
Like, and at a certain point, even with say like Horizon, I stopped reading all the data points, and I realize I'm losing a lot of story that way. And especially in a game like Elden Ring, where they bury so much of the lore inside all of the item descriptions, and I'm like, I can't. Like, I want to keep playing. Partly, it's tough to read off the TV or the screen. But yeah, partly I don't know what it is, because obviously, like, I love reading, I love words, but the second they're on a screen like that, something shuts down.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Like the second it becomes meta, I'm just like, I'm out. I can't read a thing within a thing. It's like, no.
That's what you learn writing for video games. You have to be very careful about how you deploy language, because the pull in video games of that sense of motion, which is just what video games do so well, is going to pull you away. The first time you start clicking through your own writing in a video game, you realize you're just not working in the same medium.
Exactly. Yeah. And, on this whole topic of storytelling and everything like that, I want to dig into each of your works a little bit more. Ciel, Nick, and Jenny, each of you have, books that are more directly sort of like inspired by video games, as opposed to having them more like embedded within the narrative, that kind of thing. So for each of you, I'll start with Ciel. What was this sort of like creative feedback loop between your writing and the video games that you're playing? And then how did that feed into Bluebird?
I think probably the biggest video game inspiration for Bluebird was Destiny 2. There's a really cool vibe to Destiny 2 where a lot of the because it's set in our solar system, and a lot of places you go to are kind of like relics of a golden age. Like there's a sense of like you're in a post utopia, like stuff used to be better and now you're dealing with a world that's not so much. But there's also like a really cool sci-fi aesthetic to it. And there's a lot of fun to it. And I feel like for me, that was a really big inspiration for Bluebird. Mostly the aesthetic, sort of the understanding that there's kind of some nostalgia for how things were in the past. Like in Bluebird, the main character Rig, her people have kind of lost everything. Like they're a lot of them are refugees. Most of them are living on like a colonized planet, and there's definitely that kind of like what their culture used to be like. There's kind of elements of that. So yeah, Destiny 2, big inspiration. I love it. I put a couple little tiny Easter eggs in my book. Nobody's noticed them, which is good. But
you've done too well.
Yeah, they're in there.
That's really cool, though. I mean, the Easter egg thing is really fascinating for me, Nick. I know you have a ton of Easter eggs, even for Dumb and Dumber, in the band series. But Ciel, beyond like the inspiration thing, do you feel like there's like playing games as like a hobby, as something that you love doing? Do you feel like it adds creative fuel to your writing process?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm a very visual person. Part of that is because I have a background in art. I went to an art high school. I've been doing art since I was 12 or something. I've had all the professional training in digital and traditional art. And video games are really strongly visual. And there's something about being able to write visually and write when I write, I imagine like, what would this scene look like in a movie? What would this scene look like in a video game? Like are there lens flares? What's the camera angle? What's the mood lighting? What's the music?
That's some Mass Effect influence right there with lens flare.
like that really influences how I write. Like, there's so many scenes that I've written where it's like, you know, I can imagine it playing out in my head like a game.
Yeah. No, it's a similar thing for me too. Although there's much less lens flare in my case, but yeah, totally. It's like visualizing that stuff and kind of like interpreting it. And a lot of the times it's like I'll have a scene in my head that is so richly detailed just there. And then it's kind of like this this exercise in translation as I try to put that on the page and interpret it in a way that sort of matches up with what's in my head. And Nick, for you, what's that creative feedback loop like between video games and writing? And then what sort of inspiration, you know, Easter eggs and that kind of things do you pull from the games that you're playing?
Well, yeah, video games are a huge, probably the biggest inspiration for me. Like I adore them more than I adore anything else in the whole world. Like, and especially just like, you know, like a vista you come across, the art direction, like the size of the scale of things is just, yeah, stunning to me. I just love it. And for at least with my own writing and my own books, I kind of take from a game like Final Fantasy where it's like anything can happen and the bigger the better, and not feeling restricted to, say, like if you're writing in a medieval setting, to medieval things. Like Final Fantasy obviously kind of mashes sci-fi and fantasy. And so I remember, and you might have heard this story before, I might have told you before, but when I first had an agent interested in it, he and I butted heads about the airships, because I have airships in a fantasy setting. And he's like, this is steampunk. I'm like, no, it's fantasy. And, you know, I'm like, they don't run on Steam, so they're not steampunk. And as you also may have heard me say, he suggested changing them to giant eagles. And
this isn't fucking Lord of the Rings, man.
Yeah.
Get it out of your head.
And so we parted ways shortly thereafter. But yeah, so my book's got everything and anything that I think is cool or wonderful or interesting or fun. And yeah, there is a few Final Fantasy related Easter eggs amongst all the other music and movie references in there.
Yeah, you got a lot of Easter eggs in your books, dude.
Too many, perhaps some would say.
Is there like a subreddit for all the Easter eggs in your?
I've seen some people try to compile on Reddit like all the music references.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I would say it's almost impossible, only because I forgot them too. Like I didn't really know them to begin with, and I put them in, and I'd forget them too. But yeah, it's nice. And my favorite reference of all of them, it's not video game related, but it's a Say Anything reference. The movie Say Anything. It's so deeply entrenched that like only like 2 people have ever been like, hey, I get that.
And then
it's not someone holding a ghetto blaster over their head.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's like the intention is the same.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's awesome. And Jenny, what about you? This sort of like creative feedback loop and how your video gaming influences or fuels your writing.
Yeah, so obviously before I was talking about how fan fiction kind of launched me in it, so that's a big one for me. But I guess with The Last Watch, my debut, obviously it is inspired by Mass Effect, but I didn't go into it realizing that. It had been many years since I had finished the trilogy, and, you know, it's always kind of in the back of my mind, but I hadn't played it recently or anything. And really Battlestar Galactica was the main thing where I was like, I want to make it like that, kind of. And then, you know, I started having my critique partners go through it, and they were like, one of them's a huge Mass Effect fan, and he was like, oh man, this, and this. I was like, that's the thing I'm doing, huh?
Just subconsciously.
Yep. Like literally subconsciously, like it is just seeped into my very being. It is just part of who I am now. So it's like, that's going to be in all my books probably. And hopefully you like it, 'cause it's going to be there. But yeah, as far as like, you know, the mechanics of writing, it is something where I will try to go play a game if I'm kind of stuck. It helps jar me out of things, you know, it's just kind of a different experience. But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a double-edged sword, because now that I'm writing, I don't have time to play video games. So
you're writing for a video game and it just took away your time.
Yeah.
The solution is don't sleep.
Yeah.
That's the solution.
I
Just
need
never
sleep though. I'm like a 7.5 or I will be useless the next day type person. So.
I'm the same way.
Yeah. Unless I pull an all-nighter, and then I am so productive. Like super, super productive.
But you can only sustain that for so long.
Yeah, you can only really do that a couple times.
Yeah.
But yeah, so obviously, they're just kind of ingrained in me, and as I get time to play more, that will happen too. And yeah, they're just, like Nicholas was saying, just the best thing.
Yeah, I agree. And Ron, you actually centered your novel deep dive around a video game. So can you delve into that a little bit? Explain why you chose a game as sort of like the narrative core concept?
I think it's two reasons. One, when I wrote the book, I was in a weird, frustrating place with the fact that I've been writing for a long time and hadn't been published. And so I kind of funneled that into the themes in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember watching a documentary on God of War called Raising Kratos. And there was a part when Cory Barlog's talking about being the dad and a husband and dealing with working a lot and, losing time with the family for the sake of having, putting out this game. And that resonated a lot. I mean, I don't think I put as much time into my books as he probably has into his games, but like I understood the frustration and the pain that came with that. And it fed right into what I was trying to do. And then I'd always had the why the story was happening in my book in my head from the beginning. And I was trying to figure out the best, I guess, medium for that to take place in.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I landed on games and specifically using a VR unit, as soon as I figured that out, I was like, okay, the ending, as weird as it may be, makes sense within the context of a VR system.
Yeah.
Right. Whether I pulled it off, I mean, who knows?
You did.
But thank you. But yeah, so once I had those two things, for sure, like, and I think also because I was playing through God of War, I was like, I want to create something like this story,
Right.
this experience. And obviously my book is nothing like God of War at all. But there was just something about the narrative in that story that I was like, that I hadn't felt reading other books for a long time. But when I played through the game and got to the end of it, I was like, I want to do that, but with a book.
Yeah, like hit those like obviously you're crafting your own narrative and it's a reflection of you as opposed to the game being a reflection of other creators. But it's like you want to hit like sort of like these emotional points that are reflective of what you've created. And that's sort of like, that just that insane like resonance that you can get with certain things. And I think that like emotional resonance is a really powerful thing that I think video games nail and books also nail. And it's kind of like this unifying factor of being able to empathize with whatever is going on and then just be like, oh shit, sit back from your book or sit back from the screen or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.